Hey guys, and welcome to Thankful Thursdays again with myself, Kel, and also Rachel. So the most annoying thing just happened. I just made this video once and I didn't turn the microphone on, and that was just completely frustrating. And it's getting late, and as many of you know, I've been quite poorly with fatigue lately and I've already had a long day. So I'm hoping that my brain lasts long enough to make this video. So the topic that Rachel and I are looking at today is eating disorders amongst family members and friends. As I imagine most of you know, I'm sure I've mentioned it in other videos, during my own eating disorder and during my recovery, I've actually lived with my partner and his family rather than my direct family. So I don't really have any experience of living with a family member with an eating disorder. However, I definitely have quite a few friends who have experienced or are experiencing an eating disorder, and during sort of my process and their process, all of us have kind of been at different stages at different times. So I guess hopefully if I can talk about that a little bit, there'll kind of be some use on both grounds and that the information will kind of transfer. One thing that I think is really important when you're kind of considering a friend or a family member with an eating disorder is that you remind yourself that the recovery journey for each person is different. So your journey and their journey is not going to be the same. You're not going to reach the same place at the same time, and you might actually never even reach the same place. Your journeys might take you in different directions. And I think it was quite important for me to learn this because I have quite a few friends with eating disorders, and I found that during my recovery it was difficult to not want to compare myself to them, compare my disorder to theirs, compare how quickly I was recovering, compare my weight, compare the meal plan we'd been given. It was really difficult to not do those things, and I think that was probably the disorder rather than me wanting to do those things, but it definitely is difficult. So what I had to really do is every time I did speak to a friend with an eating disorder, I had to remind myself, okay, though we both have an eating disorder, and in my case we both have anorexia, I have to be aware that we actually don't have exactly the same disorder, and reminding myself that frequently allowed me to not want to compare myself so much, or enabled me to stop myself comparing everything so much. And if you don't do that, it's going to become so difficult because you're not going to gain weight at the same rate. You're not going to get given exactly the same meal plan probably. You're not going to get exactly the same treatment, and you're not going to reach milestones exactly the same time. And it's hard to realise that everybody doesn't recover the same, because I think when you're in your disorder you want somebody to say, okay, here's the answer, this is how you recover. And I was always quite nervous of like, oh my gosh, if they're recovering like this, why am I not doing that? Am I doing something wrong? And it is just, you have to keep reminding yourself of this same thing, that everybody's recovery is different, everybody's journey is different, and hopefully that can sort of enable you to kind of separate it a little bit, and not, though you're emotionally involved as a friend, not being emotionally tangled up with your disorder. And the other thing in terms of that is when you're spending time with that friend, I mean, it's quite normal to go out with friends for food and things, but when you have an eating disorder, it seems to be that if a couple of you congregate together, or I certainly found that I recovered before most of my friends with eating disorders, and if we went out together, I'd be like, okay, I'm hungry, and I'd be quite conscious of eating around them, and they probably should have been the people I should have been least self-conscious around, but I was kind of knowing that they probably weren't going to eat because I was further along in my recovery, and that type of thing can be difficult, and you have to sort of, before you go into that situation, you have to say to yourself, okay, this is probably going to happen today, because you know it is going to happen, and how am I going to handle this? And you have to decide how you're going to handle it beforehand and kind of stick to that, or else it really can be detrimental to your recovery, and that's the last thing you want. The reason that we forge friendships with other people with eating disorders is because they're one of the few people that really understand us, or understand us as much as they can. And so you want that to be positive and not negative. Another thing that I also realised was quite important was that I spent time with people without an eating disorder, people that had a healthy relationship with food and healthy relationship with their body, because especially if you're living with somebody with an eating disorder, if it's a family member, if it's your sister or if it's your parent that has an eating disorder, and you're quite often in that environment, it's almost like the eating disorder becomes normalised. All your behaviours are normal and kind of expected, and you don't realise what actually is really normal, what everybody else without an eating disorder does, and it's quite easy to get quite lost in that. And I certainly know from when I was sort of beginning recovery and I was given a meal plan, I was quite shocked by what was an okay amount to eat, because I truly had forgotten what eating healthily meant. And I sort of got this meal plan from the dietitian, and then when I was out with friends and I was kind of trying to stick to this meal plan, which I thought was a huge amount of food, to actually see that that amount of food was, to other people without a disorder, completely fine, and in some cases a little less than they might eat, was quite educational. So I do think that it's definitely good to spend time with people without eating disorders as well. I guess the last point is to make is in terms of supporting a friend or a family member with an eating disorder. I actually moderate on an eating disorders forum. Well, it's a sort of a general forum for mental health, but I particularly moderate in the eating disorders section. And I think I'm quite known there for saying it how it is, and that's not always the best option. I mean, for me, that's who I am, and if I am feeling it, then I need to say it to the other person, because I need to be honest with them. But sometimes I can get volatile reactions, and I quite understand those, really. But when you're supporting the other person and you're at a different place in your recovery, perhaps further along the track, you're probably going to have sort of understood concepts a little bit more clearly, and sometimes you can say things that the other person doesn't quite get and they take offence to, and I guess each person needs to decide how they feel about that, whether they want to be completely there as supportive or whether they're willing to take the backlash occasionally and say something that the other person might not be yet willing to hear. And it can be really difficult watching a friend and you being at a different place in recovery and saying things and them not taking it in, and them doing things that are bad for their health and bad for their recovery. That can be a really difficult place. But I think it's really great to know that you've got somebody there as well from the other side of this, that the other person has recovered. So like for your friend to see that you've recovered or are further along in recovery, if you are, can be a really good thing as well, because I've had people say that it kind of showed them that recovery was possible, and that's something that I'm very adamant about saying. I definitely felt like during my recovery lots of people were telling me that full recovery wasn't possible, that it'd always be something that I would struggle with, but I can definitely say that today I don't, and I'd like to think that that's a good thing for my friends that still do have eating disorders and are still recovering, a good thing for them to see. So I'm thinking I'm probably pushing 10 minutes now, so I'm going to shut up. I hope this has been useful, and I hope you're all well. Take care until next week, guys. Bye.